Hello and welcome to the Sex and Wellness Podcast with Dr. Mary. I'm so excited for today's session. Today we're here with Avery Lilly. She's an intuitive guide. She works where belief and spirituality and intuition intersect and really helps people conquer and work with their limiting beliefs. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for today's conversation.
I'm so excited just because we've talked a lot on this podcast about physical health. We've talked about different ways that our physical health can affect our bodies and just really understanding our physical bodies because we haven't really. And so what I really want to get out of our conversation today and address is just, okay, now we've really tapped into, there's different parts to our bodies. There's a physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects.
Absolutely.
And if you asked me years ago as a healthcare practitioner, I'd be like, no, none of that stuff is combined. Like it's all separate. When somebody has back pain, it's just back pain. As you start talking to more and more patients and stuff and clients, I'm realizing, wow, there is this huge connection between all three components. And so this is great for anybody, regardless of the religion that you're in, to really dive in and understand yourself spiritually and emotionally.
Absolutely. And I hope that we demystify it, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some really practical reasons for that. Body as a physical component heals itself inherently unless the environment is not conducive for healing. I actually have this ridiculous bruise from rock climbing, which I'm into. And I was noticing it just heals itself. I don't go in there and do something about it, right? If the environment is correct. A lot of times we're really into changing the physical environment. That's on the rise right now, which is great. But we're not looking at the emotional and spiritual environment, which affects the rate of healing and also how we hold our body. We can talk a lot about clenching. I'm sure you see this, right?
And pelvic floor pain and tightness and pain with sex and a lot of these different things.
Not all of that comes from some physical ailment or an imbalance in the bacteria. A lot of it comes from, everybody think about something stressful right now. Tell me what your body does.
Exactly.
And if you never turn that off, what happens?
And if that's all you've known.
All you've known. You don't even know it because you have no comparison anymore.
Exactly.
You can't remember the moment before you started clenching your gut and couldn't digest anymore.
You might be thinking, what does this have to do with sex and wellness? It has everything to do with it because I laugh because it's more of, man, I've had some crazy aha moments just even with us working together and then in my personal therapy and then taking time to really tap into my subconscious brain and figure out my fears and stuff. And so we can talk about that and really how it sounds crazy, but how cancer actually healed me.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing to unpack to share my story. And so we'll get into a question here and then we'll attack it from a bunch of different angles.
Absolutely.
So we have a message from Carolyn in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's 40 years old. She says, "Hi, Dr. Mary. I am trying to take the time to work on myself, but the guilt and worries are limiting me from doing them. Any tips on how I can stop worrying so I can take care of myself?"
Ooh, yeah.
I feel I work with a lot of women, and what I'm finding is that we carry so much guilt and shame, and just to even unpack this is huge. So obviously we don't know too much about Carolyn, but I would say, just from generally speaking and working with a lot of clients with vulvas, there's just a lot to unpack with some of the guilt and shame and fears. So let's chat about how we were talking before. Let's just break this down as if you're explaining it to a kiddo, right? Yeah. Because I don't think people understand their subconscious and conscious brains as much as we could know, right?
Yeah.
And how it manifests in every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. So let's define those terms for today, right? Because there's a lot of different meanings to different people of what subconscious and conscious mean. What I actually like to tell people is, conscious is what you're very aware of. You're thinking about it like she knows she's in some guilt and shame about certain areas. The subconscious, it's not actually not conscious for you, right? You're so used to it. It's so silent, right? It's silent consciousness.
Yes.
Because I would say if it was truly below your consciousness, it wouldn't be affecting you. But it shows up as the thoughts you're subtly thinking all day, every day that you're so used to, you don't notice. Then when you're in a panic, you panic about money. Oh my gosh, I feel so bad for taking care of myself. That's very conscious, right? But what's underneath that? Why? That's that subconscious. And that's what we're really looking at. It's like, why are you feeling guilty about this? Where does that come from? And you don't have to get to the root of every single why, but until you address the why and relieve yourself from that belief system, you're going to have a really hard time making any major pattern changes. And that includes in the physical, right? I've seen this with people who are trying to change diet and exercise, but they are so ashamed and they never get it right.
That was me. I felt like I was shameful of my body. I was never thin enough. I had to look a certain way before I became happy. I was doing all the exercising and nutrition, but I was not even tapping in and understanding the emotional component and how that was manifesting in my body.
Yeah.
And to keep yourself in that constant fight or flight, people wonder, especially when people are in their 30s and 40s, right? Our bodies are changing and they're like, I can't lose the weight. Like I'm putting on weight. I don't understand. And I'm like, this is when this whole component comes in, because you might be, and I'm not advocating for weight loss by any means. It's just more of, if you feel your body is different and you feel something shifting or hitting differently in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it might be diving into this kind of emotional and the kind of spiritual component of our bodies. Because if you're constantly feeling guilt every time you eat, which I was, every time you spend money, which I was, it's all that stuff weighs on you, and that can increase your cortisol, which then can increase the belly fat, your blood sugar, your hypertension, like all of these things. And in our medical society, we say, oh, just take a pill. Just
here's your calorie count for the day, everyone. You're like, what? Like, First off, those restrictive diets, I have seen people lose weight on that, lose their hair. And again, I'm not a diet coach. I did have a degree in health and wellness. So I went from that very traditional background. I worked in healthcare as well. And I was literally left with, oh my gosh, we're not getting it right.
We're not.
Because I was like, I know all the healthy things I'm supposed to do. Do I do all of them? No. And that was what really drove me. Just like Carolyn here, who's asking us this question, it's like, okay, I know I feel guilty and shame, but what am I supposed to do with that? And I'm, again, on that, we're obviously not advocating for weight loss, but it's like you have this goal you're trying to meet and you're doing the things and it's not working. And I've actually had someone who came to me specifically with that as a thing. And I was like, I want you to give up every diet you're on, unless it's obviously medically regulated for something, and just quit whatever exercise you're doing that's miserable. And I just want you to spend a few days every time you say something horrible to yourself, see if you could shift it to something kind. And she tried that for a while. And then I talked to her a while later, 6 months later, and she's, I am in my favorite exercise I've ever done. I'm just eating things I like. I don't feel that I've lost the weight I intended to. That's healthy for me. And none of it was because she had a prescription. That's where that intuition comes in. Her intuition guided her when her belief system changed to my body's of value.
Exactly. And I think growing up growing up in the 90s, and now we're seeing the whole Victoria's Secret documentary come out about setting these unrealistic expectations for our bodies. I remember being like in 8th grade and eating ice cream and crying while I'm watching these models who are like 100 pounds walking down the runway and thinking, no one's ever going to love me because I don't look like that.
Yeah.
And then you're told this narrative that then you're supposed to look a certain way, you're supposed to act. And I loved, is it Miranda from Sex and the City, where I don't know her real name, but she talks about, I don't know if you saw that viral video years ago where it was like, talk like a lady, don't curse. Oh, you're cursing too much. You're not cursing enough. You're too tall. You're too thin. You're too fat. And it's just like this constant like culture that we've set up, at least in the United States. It's just, we've told little girls, and then they have grown up to women, is that we're not enough.
Oh yeah.
And so I see this manifested a lot in my clients, especially like in the pelvic floor, in the body, and a lot of this shame and guilt of, oh, if I'm spending money on my health, it should be going towards my kids, or it should be this, or it should be that. And I love Brene Brown's work because she's stop the should.
Yeah.
But let's chat about, okay, so Can you break down like what intuition is? Because I feel, let's just, like I said, pretend like nobody's ever heard of this.
Absolutely. A lot of people have heard of it in survival scenarios only.
Yeah.
So I want to break down a more useful, a more kind of day-to-day intuition and outside of, I knew that was bad for me. Total survival intuition is very real. Almost everyone understands instincts in that way. But this is the inner voice, inner nudging. Voice is a little too mystical for what it is, right? It's, I want to do that feeling, or I don't want to do that, right? It's a very defined sense of yes, no, or a curiosity towards something you don't normally do. That's what it's going to feel like.
Yeah.
But our intuition is going to be based on where we want to go and how much we believe that's possible.
Yeah.
And so your kind of guidance, right? So a lot of times people are like, I felt like I was supposed to do that, but they're really playing out their programming, right?
Yeah.
Intuition is the inner narrative that leads us outside of our programming and towards our actual goals. And we'll work really hard to get us around it, but we don't listen.
No, we don't, because we've never A, been taught to listen, and B, from me growing up, it's, oh, you're supposed to have this plan and do X, Y, Z. How many people have come to you and come to myself just with chronic pain and things like that, where they're making all the money in the world. I don't understand. I'm attractive. I'm fine. I can make friends easily, but I can't get these deeper, intimate relationships, or I can't. And I think it's been crazy, this journey for me, is because it's like being diagnosed with cancer. Before this, I was people pleasing, giving energy to all these people that didn't deserve it. And it was almost like I was doing it from a place of fear. Like, I want people to like me. I want this. And I think that's a lot of people, the people pleasing aspect.
Absolutely, right? Because one, we're trained. And we're looking at this feminine side in this one gendered way, right? But there is shame and sexual wounding for every type of body. But we're focusing on that because that's our own experience. There is people pleasing allows us to feel validated and accepted. Right?
Externally.
And so it's not just that we're told to, it's that it allows us to feel at peace for a moment, right? And our body functions on looking for things that feel good. And we kind of shame this in ourselves, but really it makes sense because inherently we know we should be feeling better in our lives. But we don't know how to create that outside of the paradigm we're in, which is you need to be this way. And people are waking up to this, right? We're getting aware, but we're still not looking at the fact that a lot of this has to do with some really deep down beliefs around our kind of spiritual worth, like our upbringing in religion or not religion, what we believed about the world and how it worked, and how much value you had and how you were supposed to show up. So if you grew up, and again, this is not, you can be in any religion now and adapt to whatever beliefs you want, right? So it's not saying you shouldn't be in them. But if you grew up being told that you were broken from the beginning and that you were the fall of man, right? Women are still really taking that credit for the fall of man, right? As if you look at the Christian narrative, it's Eve's fault, right? Yeah. So we're still playing out these myths. And then we're playing out the reactionary myths, which are people who are opposing that, but they're just going to the other side of the stick, which is like, express yourself in every single way, but you're not really looking at what feels good. So I'm going to put myself out there so I feel good. Then you still feel horrible. So you go and you feel liberated, but really you're actually still very sad and wanting connection because we've just disconnected entirely. We forgot to listen to our body and our real desires and navigate from that, right? Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And just coming at it from a narrative of this kind of, we've been told, okay, it's men and then women. So it's like when people use the term like patriarchy, I feel like it can take this whole narrative of hating men and stuff like that. And I definitely don't want to take that because there are plenty of wonderful men in this world.
Yeah, and we don't want to create them either by really playing into it. Like we don't want to ostracise men that need healing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is that they've been invalidated for their feelings. They've been told, again, we're talking about this from a binary standpoint, but it's like just... it's easier to like break when we break down kind of these cultural patterns. But I think this is also why we have a lot of really angry, upset, sad men, because we as women, we've been told it's normal to talk to your girlfriends and express your feelings, and it's okay to cry, versus if you spin the narrative, it's not okay. You have to be a man, grow up, stop crying, and it can affect everybody in different ways. But the point is everybody has been told a different narrative. Also, this is just based on gender. There's different narratives based on race as well, and different narratives based on religion. And so really this can be all encompassing in understanding. It's not, you're really just questioning what brings you joy.
Yeah.
And so if you follow a certain religion and that brings you joy, great.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Take away your belief system,
yeah,
or your joy,
or
what makes you feel allowed for anyone else's view, especially not on someone's podcast, right? Especially not us.
I'm all about inclusive. I want to be inclusive. Yeah.
So let's really bring it, not even man and woman, masculine and feminine, which exists in both of us, right? And we live in a world, and we're hating on it, but like, we've encouraged this masculine side of us. And this very much exists in me as a person who wanted to go out and work to conquer. And then we're shocked in sexual dynamics when it's a very conquering mentality. And we're like, why is this? I can't believe this. We actually also expect that, because I know a lot of feminine people who are expecting that conquering energy too from the masculine. And then vice versa, we have shut the feminine down for all of us, right?
Yes.
They're not allowed to have their feminine side. Whatever gender you're taking, that's still a little bit more suppressed. And that includes our intuition.
Totally. Regardless of the gender, it's like, we've been taught you go to school for 4 years, you graduate, you come out with a degree, then you work under that degree, and then you stay there for 50 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously not 50, but like the point is that was the narrative that we were taught in our generation and up. And I'm a little envious of these younger generations, because they're like, follow your intuition and be confident and understand your self-worth. And I'm like, oh my God, if I knew this stuff, like at 20, I would just have conquered this world, like in a good way.
Absolutely.
It's just
but it's
like,
still our time, right? Because we're actually, we're doing a similar age group where like we are doing kind of the labor of removing that culturally. And so if you're really in it right now, remember you're not doing it just for you, because you're giving permission to people. And the women who are older than us, who we might be like, how come they hold those beliefs? Like they did a lot of work on other beliefs, right? They were the women that let us even have a job.
Exactly.
And now we're like, although take them back, but just give us more fun. We want money and not so much work, right? That's where we're at now. We're like, we don't want to play in the man's world. We actually want an entirely new world.
Yeah.
And this work, our body is like this microcosm of the world in a way, right? It's the way you treat yourself and the way you think about yourself is how you're going to show up. And so doing the personal work first, and then letting that guide how you do your mission in life, whatever that is, wherever you're at, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, with joy, a lot of people, one of the reasons they're having a hard time getting past guilt and shame is because they forgot that joy was an option, right? So there's these underlying beliefs, but there's also a belief that joy is frivolous and extra. It's dessert after your substantial meal.
Exactly.
Rather than it's the meal. It's what gets you going. What lights you up, what fires you up is what's going to make you a better version of you for all of those people. And a lot of times the people that are holding the most guilt around doing personal work are someone who has a lot of other people to serve. So a parent or a CEO or someone who's like running, and they feel that they have a lot of other people they're responsible for.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Oh, if I don't do this, the whole world's going to fall apart and my children aren't going to think I love them. The narrative goes on and on. Yeah. And it's, wait a second, let's stop. Let's just play this out. If you take care of your body and your mental health, you can show up better for your kids.
Absolutely.
And I run into this even though I don't have children myself, but I run into this from a business perspective. When I'm feeling stuck at work, all you want to do is keep working and come up with something. But when I step back and I focus on my intuition, what brings me joy, what serves me, and then focus everything around that versus trying to chase this, trying to chase that. What is it that you can tap into and then make that world work around you? At least when I grew up, I saw that making money was really hard. It was really stressful. There was a lot of anger and stress and toughness and long hours associated with it. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, wait, what if you could do something that's enjoyable?
Yeah.
And what I find, and maybe you're seeing this too, is after COVID, a lot of kind of people started having this experience. As much as COVID sucked, I felt like I felt 6 months before COVID was when I had just finished my cancer treatment. And I had this whole new perspective on what am I doing with my life? Why did I do all these things that I've always done? And you start challenging those beliefs. And what I'm seeing is entrepreneurship's going up. Like people are really attacking their dreams and more so than they ever have, but there's still a lot of people that aren't. And But it's just interesting because
the myth of the security of their job also went away. A lot of people
Yes.
were out of work or they were at home and they weren't sure how the world was going to go. Now, if you've been a self-employed entrepreneur for a while, you've had that myth was crushed a while ago. You're like, I walk a little tightrope and I hope it works out. But people in a employed who feel that sense of job security suddenly didn't, which is very terrifying. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. But what it did was remind them that they don't need to cling to something for that because it wasn't a given anyway.
I think that's really important too, because it's like, when I worked at corporate, I never did the internal work that I'm doing now. And not saying everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, but I'm just saying if you're on this growth and understanding and trying to find happiness and worthiness and all these things, you have to push yourself to some discomfort.
Absolutely.
And I will always quote Brené Brown, but it's just like lean. And you find that if something brings discomfort into your body, sit with it and decide, is this discomfort because I'm fearful? Or is this discomfort something that truly does not interest me?
Yeah.
And I think, so let's talk about that. Okay, I'll give you an example. Something that like I said, my stuff with money, right? Oh, if I still feel this guilt when I pay for massages or healthcare or something on myself, but I still do it because I know that's what if I pay now for these things, then it will help me exponentially in a few years, or even just now into the day to day. And so I find that sometimes there's like that, like I said, that guilt, but when I lean into it and I realize this is something I work hard, I work a lot, dig deep with my clients. And in order for me to show up better for them and my friends and family, I need to do some of this work. One of my fear limiting beliefs is that if you're to me, I'm very tied to, I have to be like busting my ass all day, every day. And if not, I'm a piece of shit. That's like the narrative.
Even in that, you were like, and again, we agreed to use you as an example, so
Yes.
I'm not picking on you. But even in that, you're like, I know I work hard, so I have a right to this. So what if you didn't? What if you just liked massages? What would that be? And you're like, I just fell off a cliff. I can't do that, right? That's too big. But you could get there, right?
Yeah.
And it's looking at the fact that like your worthiness, right? That subconscious belief is how hard you work. And you mentioned it, you know where it comes from in your parents. So it's really funny for everyone out there who's they don't want to take care of themselves for their kids. Don't worry. They won't absorb what you gave them. They'll absorb who you are because your parents provided for you. That's not what you're working with now, right? You're working with the belief systems that they had to embody to get that for you. Remembering like who you are is what they're going to get. And so if you want your children to grow up with leisure and joy and ease, then you might want to find that in yourself, because you can give them all the money and all of the things, but what money comes and goes, right? And that safety can come and go, right? When they're out of the house, whatever it is you're trying to provide for them, how often you're there but not present, all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's who you are that gives them permission to act that way. We're more subconsciously absorbing our environment than we are it's not the actions in the day to day, right? We don't even remember most of that stuff. We don't remember the fanciest of gifts. But what we remember is how stressed our parents were every day about getting that money. And how not present they were. And so this is not a shame or a judgment on a parent. It's the permission. Sometimes I'd love for everyone to do it for them, but that's not how most of us work, right? So do it for your children.
An external reason. And like I said, it's not blaming anybody's parents or anything like that, right? Because then that just adds to the fear and frustration and that negative energy that we don't want to live in necessarily. But for me, it's like our parents didn't really have these resources.
They had no idea.
It's just now coming out, and it's like mind-blowing stuff. But
just now collectively getting permission to not work so hard. Looking at other cultures now, because we have so much more of a global world with the internet than our parents and their parents had. And we're realizing that not every culture functions like this. And they're fine. Especially Europe. Especially Europe, right? Because they're more comparatively income level, education level, similar on some regard. But their lifestyle, right? The amount of time they have off, all of these things that we feel are going to be a detriment to us. They're essential because you aren't here to make money. You're here to live.
We are not here to make money because money is actually a social construct that we made up in order to exchange energy. So we're stressing about stuff that isn't even necessarily real that's affecting our health. And I'll tell you, when I was diagnosed with cancer treatment, I was still exercising regularly. I was eating super healthy and all these different things. And I can tell you, it was a combination of stuff, ignoring my intuition, pushing myself beyond what I wanted to do because I thought that's what I had to do versus what I really genuinely enjoyed. How much energy was I giving to people that didn't necessarily care? Which is hard to say. It's like you realize, like, when you start going through this, it can be scary because you're like, holy shit.
And that's how you were saying cancer healed you. You're like, I gotta look at I'm doing the physical things. How did I get here? And this is not to say you caused it. It's just that it caused the opportunity for you to look. Because you were like, I can't just operate the way I've been operating. And our lives will bring that to us. And it doesn't have to be in a scary way. We're not all going to get some disease or illness. But rather than viewing that as a failure on our part, right? This was the opportunity to literally become who you are now.
Totally. I don't think I would have ever had these conversations. I don't think I would have dove into it, if maybe 10, 15, 20 years, maybe.
Yeah.
But when just even having these conversations, it can be pretty cool because I think so much of us live in fear. And fear because that's what we learned. But every single decision I have made out of fear or doing what I should do has screwed me.
Oh, yeah. Backfired.
Big time.
As a gift to remind you not to live that way. You're like, it's like the whole world's trying to show us we don't need to live in fear. And so it works out. But these stress hormones are so addicting. Cortisol is actually very addictive. We look for things to be stressed. And on some level, the body does not know the difference between what's happening in your mind and what's happening in your exterior environment because we're so good at generating emotions. And so a lot of the time, where does belief come into play in this? It's like, well, if I believe that nothing's working out, even though I work really hard to overcome it, it's not going to work out because I choose based on that belief system. Your intuition, what your nudges are based on that belief system. So you are more likely to choose something that doesn't work because that's what you're primed to look for. Have you ever been looking for a certain type of car, right? And now it's everywhere. You're buying a Subaru and everywhere is Subarus, right? And they're all blue in the color you want. They were not there before, I promise. They didn't mystically show up. You're noticing it. And that is how our selective brain works. There's too much in the world, so you select. So if your belief system is there is danger everywhere, and if you somewhat believe if you work really hard, you'll get through it, you'll probably create that. But it'll always be hard because you look for the hardest path, like the blue Subaru, right? We don't even know it. But it is the belief system and the narrative that's running through your head is what you are going to filter in, which means you feel like there's no other options, right? So doing work on those belief systems, looking at them, accepting them, right? Not judging yourself. You created that as a survival mechanism at some point, right? Our fear about money helped us to feel like we were going to get out ahead of it.
And it never happens.
No.
Never happen. I know people with millions and millions and they still feel the same. And I know people that don't make millions and they're living their best life. You know? And it's just interesting because you and I were talking about this, and I get, based on my journey and everything I've been through, I get a lot of people saying you're fearless. And I'm like, oh, you and I dove into that word, and fearless should never be a word.
Because it's never true.
I have been so scared so many times. I remember when I first started my practice, leaving the corporate world, I remember standing at the top of my stairs, like looking out the window being like, oh my God. I just left. I followed my intuition. I quit this job. My heart was telling me to go this different direction, which I don't even know what the direction is, but I just did it. And that leap is so scary, but it changed my life.
Yeah.
It changed my life, and it helped me grow into this human that I am. And then even going through divorce, realizing that this relationship isn't serving me. And realizing what I want is like to be truly myself and to be truly happy and to grow in a way that aligns with me. Right. And not saying anybody's a bad person. It's just more of sometimes as you start coming up with these, like you're questioning these things, a lot of tough decisions come into play. And it's not like I just woke up one day and that was it. It was, you just really work through it. And then with the cancer stuff, I remember being so angry, so fearful, so upset. And here I am 3.5 years later being done with treatment. And I cannot express enough how much I want people to hear this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Well, and like you said, the fearless, it's,
yeah.
in fact, when you start doing that, you're going to become a lot more afraid for a second.
Yeah.
It's that you no longer define your actions based on the fear story.
Yes.
And that's coming back to that intuition. I'm going to lead you past the fear story because you will only get what you've always gotten. Besides the random life surprises like an illness or disease, you're like, I didn't have that before. You're like, yeah, but you already had the feeling of being unwell.
Oh, I know exactly. I was highly stressed, dictated my self-worth with work all the time and not enjoying things. You and I have talked about, we both randomly picked up piano, and it's like,
I know, at the same time.
And I'm like, I love piano now.
I love it. It's a love-hate because I'm like, why do I still play like a child? And you're like, because I just started like a child. I'm still got to learn Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's where you start.
I've been doing Jingle Bells where it's like, jingle bells. It's the same note the whole time.
When you have to play it 10 times, you're like, I might die. But you're like, I love this. I love it. I'm going to be so good in 14 years.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually going to have my piano teacher is going to have me do a recital. And I think it's going to be me and like a bunch of 5-year-olds.
I love this.
I'm going to invite everybody.
I'm coming. I have to. I'm literally going to have to take pictures like a mob because I feel that. You're like, but the thing is, I had a big story. I wanted to do that for years. Like, why didn't my mom push me to do it as a child? Here we go. Blaming my mom. Not her fault. She just, I probably wasn't very disciplined. That's the truth then. Yeah. And now that I'm an adult, fun is a little more disciplined than as a child. I was pretty carefree then and whimsical. I couldn't focus. But the narrative of I'm going to be bad at this and I hate that. That was uncomfortable for me.
It's
and
okay.
Finally, I was like, who cares, right? I am never going to get somewhere if I don't get past the sticky, unknown, wobbly parts of myself.
And once you lean into it's going to be uncomfortable. Okay. Just sit with it and feel that uncomfortable feeling. And the more we suppress it, the more that we're just not tapping into things that bring us joy.
Yeah.
I've tried a bunch of different things. I've tried pottery. I'm like, I'm not really into it.
Actually.
Really?
Yes.
I'm like,
it was grounding for a minute. It was messy. I was like, okay, this is calming, but it didn't stick.
I couldn't get into it. The other thing I really enjoyed doing was there's a stand-up comedy course you can take here in Austin.
Okay, that's fun.
And people are like, oh my God, that's so scary. How'd you do that? And I go, when you face death, you're just like, why did I care? What is the worst that's going to happen? They boo me off stage. Okay. I'm still going to be breathing. I'm still going to have my heart. I'm going to have my lungs. I have my brain. I have my friends. I have everything and I'm safe. And when you can do and tell yourself that, I'm not saying it wasn't scary. It was super fun. I made some great friends. I've laughed super hard. I challenged myself in a way that I had never. I was so nervous because we do a recital or we had a little, not a rehearsal, a show at the end, right? And I could have not invited my friends because I was embarrassed, but I invited a lot of them because I was amazing. Like, just lean into that. And I can't tell you how much joy, but I think sometimes people don't even know. They're like, where do I even start?
They don't know where their joy lives.
So what would you say if somebody's like, God, how do I even start? Yeah. Like, where do I even start? So what would you say to that person?
If you're at the point, right, there's a moment where you're like, I can't even decide what I want for dinner anymore. The number one thing you need to do is probably rest.
Yeah,
it's not even joy. If you're so overwhelmed, there's not even anything. You can't even find one thing that you're curious about or that's been on your mind. It means you have no room. And joy is like a higher energy thing for your nervous system. And if you're at the point of absolute overwhelm and chaos, you don't need fun, you need peace. Yes. Does that make sense? So I tell people in that space, like, what you need is more quiet time. Yeah. You need like a nap. You need restful vacation, not one where you expect yourself to go paddleboarding every day. People are so frustrated with themselves when they go on vacation and all they want to do is rest. And it's because your nervous system cannot continue on that pace, right? And so this is where those beliefs come in. Like, you are so constantly stressed. It is natural to need to turn fight or flight off and then repair. Not play, right? Yeah. But then if let's say they do have some things, right, they're not that far in, then I would say, what are you curious? What have you been thinking about randomly? What has come into your mind multiple times, right? That's that whisper of your intuition. Or what is it that you see someone doing that would be the most fun, right? So if you always watch SNL and you're like, God, they look like they're having so much fun, then go to the comedy thing, right? But if you're like go to your Instagram and tell me what you're randomly following that's not your content or your friends. Yeah. Right? Who do you always click on? Is it someone who makes clothes? Is it someone who does ceramics? Are they like outdoor enthusiasts? Are they acro yoga people? Do you love seeing that? Do you always click like on that? You can tell a lot by your like just natural draw.
Yeah, the things that kind of draw you to them. So I'll even just make either mental notes, or I take lately I've been really taking a lot of voice notes because I like to hear the energy that I'm in that time. If I'm sad, if I'm happy, I want to feel that again. And so lately I've been using the combo between that and a journal, but sometimes I like that because then I can go back and be like, oh my God, look how much I've grown in just 3 months. And it's hard, I think, that even identifying that. So if you're feeling constantly overwhelmed, your nervous system is heightened. And usually when that constant overwhelm happens, you have pain, anxiety, and stress. And then what can happen is, like you're saying, like either you may not have the ability to go on a vacation, but maybe it's if you can ask your friends or family, if you have kids, to take a day or go to something special for yourself and just slowly add some of that stuff in. And you might find that downtime you want to rest, like you're saying, but that's your recovery.
Yeah,
that's
that
not
won't last either.
And that's not your thriving. So what I would say is almost like if we could explain this from like a physical aspect, right? So if I cut my finger, okay, and I kept reopening it over and over, I would be like, why is it not healing? This is frustrating.
Yeah.
Like it's taken time, right? Like I've taken 3 weeks and it's still not healing. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing that's causing that to reopen and get irritated over and over again? I'm overusing it, right? I'm using it too much that my body can't actually heal. So then it's okay. So then I have some downtime to heal that finger. And then as it starts moving again, then I can use my finger to do things that I enjoy, playing the piano or things like that. But it took some downtime to heal. And then we come back up and to thrive. But I feel like we constantly live in this like mediocrity.
Yeah.
And not reaching our potential. And that's why when people call me fearless, I'm like, oh, no way. I am not. I just challenge my fears and I lean into them because I've had this life change where it's very similar to people that are dying. It's like, why did I care so much? Why didn't I do things that bring me joy? And what does that even mean? I think people are so disconnected on what that even means and how it affects their body.
Yeah. And specifically, how does all this, right here we're supposed to be talking about sex, how does it relate? And I think that's where it's actually fascinating.
Yeah.
One, let's look at the relationship aspect, right? We have been given enough movies to tell us that everything is going to be solved by a romantic relationship programming, right?
Yeah.
All our Disney movies
I can't
talk
even.
about our subconscious. But here's what we're saying, like what we're talking about is going to take a lot of pressure off of that relationship because we are looking to that. And for the one sexual moment to be enough pleasure to make up for all the areas we're denying ourselves joy and discomfort, but also getting uncomfortable and moving but towards something joyful is a great example of how to move past a rut in a sexual experience, right? In relating, in looking at the healing of those things, because it's much easier actually to do it somewhere else than it is there, right? And it's what area of our body, what area of our life is the most obviously emotional and physical, right? And maybe not everyone's sure about the spiritual aspect of that, but emotional and physical is our sexuality, right? We assume that because it's obviously very emotional, even though the rest of the body is the same. But this area, I think people, that experience was very emotional. I felt very connected, or I went into absolute disconnect because I had a trauma. And so other areas sometimes are where you want to start. If you can put yourself out there and express yourself vocally or creatively, this is going to start getting more momentum and getting you in the pattern of discomfort does not mean stop.
Yes, I think that's important because discomfort and anxiety and fear can all feel the same. And I've been very open about my anxiety, and really all of that gets suppressed when you are doing things that bring you joy and that fill up your cup.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting, like you said, like in relationships and sexual relationships, is we've been told, hey, your partner, like if you find this person, then you're going to be happy. And I remember thinking that over and over. And you can be in a healthy relationship and be unhappy with yourself. Yeah. Which is that really even a healthy relationship? Because if you're not able to show up for yourself, how can you show up for anybody else and vice versa? And so it's, being happy and content with yourself. And what I find actually this pops up a lot in people that recent moms or just moms in general or people with children is that they have disconnected from their own identity, and now they're just a parent.
Yep.
And what I find happens with that is there's higher agitation with the kids.
Yeah.
There is more fatigue. There is more guilt. There is less time for themselves. There is this constant urgency culture. And then that's what they learn. It's normal. And so it's not saying anybody that's doing this is bad. It's just, hey, let's challenge those beliefs. Let's see what makes you feel good.
Let's challenge that. It's got to be so hard, right? The mommy needs a drink vibe, right?
Oh,
and I have no problem with drinking. But what we're saying is being a parent is so horrible and rough that you need alcohol to function. That's not good. And I'm not judging people who share these memes. They're funny at the time. I get it. But at the same time, we're trying to break down this world where you're functioning in a way and not getting the help that you need and the support that you need, or you're taking on things that really don't need to be done by you in general.
I think it's really funny you bring that up, because I actually get really frustrated with those posts.
I do too.
Because I used to be that person that would binge drink to do that. But if we keep normalizing that, I'm not saying being a parent isn't hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, right?
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that if you constantly feel this urge to drink at night, or you're constantly feeling this urge to do something to numb you, I'm not saying drinking's bad. You might enjoy that glass of wine. Maybe that's your joy. So great. But if I challenge people to question why.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? If you're doing it constantly, okay, occasionally you have a stressful day, you want wine, whatever. But if you're doing it and it's a pattern, and I see these memes where the woman's chugging water or chugging the wine, and people are laughing, and I'm like, oh man, that makes me a little sad.
Yeah.
That people, I'm not, like I said, not saying this is bad. It's just more of can you do in your day, even if it's smaller things that bring you joy. And it can be, like I said, I don't want this to be like a privilege thing where, hey, you can take off 2 weeks of work and decompress, because you may not be able to do that.
Yeah.
But what can you do in your current environment right now that serves you? Maybe it's shutting your computer off at 5 p.m. It's putting on do not disturb for the first couple hours of your workday and getting into, or maybe do not disturb after your workday or before your workday. Or maybe it's spending extra time getting ready in the morning, or whatever that is. Or maybe if you like coffee, making your favorite cup of coffee or drink, or your meal, or enjoying your meal.
Yeah.
The amount of times that I ate so fast just because it was inefficient use of time. I'm I've said that.
Well, here we are. It's so funny. We're all trying to make enough money to then enjoy our lives. You're not going to know how to enjoy your life then. You're going to know how to enjoy it now. Learn to enjoy it now. Because you may not have later. And not from a fear base, but that's not a promise. And it is the little tiny bits of joy that are going to change you over time. It is not the vacation. The vacation may be the reset, right? But it's actually, whether you can or can't, it's a privilege, absolutely, to be able to have that. It is the tiny things that everyone should work on, because people who have the luxury of going on a vacation, let's say a lot, they always do it. They're their most true self there. And then they come back and they're like, God, I wish I could have stayed. I'm like, who were you there? Yeah, it's all, I didn't work. Okay, but how did you show? You didn't just sit there all day.
Yeah,
right?
What did you do?
What'd you do?
Yeah.
And can you do a little bit of that now? And how did you look at the world? You look at the world with possibility. But the problem is, another belief system is we show up and we've assumed our entire day, our week, our month, our year, based on what our responsibilities and our duties are. And so we no longer have possibility. And that kills us as a soul.
And it makes you exhausted. It makes you anxious. It makes you tired. And it's really interesting, because it's what's important, I think, with anxiety and depression and things like that is, our system is just go ahead and take meds, versus, okay, some people need meds.
Absolutely.
And some people, diving into stuff like this can help them with their depression and anxiety. And I know for a fact, having both of those in the past, this work has really helped me. But there's also things that kind of dump me into a fight or flight response, right? And so that's when I take that info and I go, ooh, okay, I was really anxious on Monday. I think it was because of XYZ. So I'm not going to be hard on myself. Yeah. I'm just going to say, okay, this is data. It's objective, neither good nor bad. And I'm going to learn from it.
Yeah.
And then the more you know yourself, the more you listen to those inner thoughts and think, the more you can be happy. You know what I like so much about hiking? We don't have a ton of hiking heels and stuff here, but a lot of like paved trails, but I'm still thankful for that. But what I like about walking in hiking is because you can have your headphones on, but I want to be careful hiking by myself with headphones on, but you have to be so in tune. You have to make sure you're looking at the ground. You're not tripping on something. You're looking at your environment. You have to be so aware that you really your conscious brain is so focused on that, that then your subconscious brain can come up. And that's why I think hobbies and stuff like that are important.
Physically challenging things. So I actually took up bouldering, like rock climbing, because I can't think about something else. I will fall. Yeah. And I love that because when I'm done with that activity, I'm like, I feel great. It is forced meditation. It's like mini survival-based meditation, and it's actually giving that survival brain something to do. It's actually letting it complete its cycle. So those are really beautiful. Hiking or trail running are similar because you're like, okay, I don't want to trip and I don't want to be not aware of my environment. But what that forces you to do is to be present. All of it is about the presence. But when we're in an anxiety that's just in our mind about work and stress, we're never present. We're always in the future, and it's not a good future. It's this negative future outcome that we think we're preventing, but really we're just already having the emotional experience of. And this is not to shame ourselves when we're anxious. It's what am I anxious about? And what's my story about it?
Writing it down. Because I used to
think, is that true?
I used to think, oh, I'm just an anxious person. That's it. And let's talk about what are you anxious about? Yeah. And usually it's like a catastrophizing based on some inner fear. But what I would say is just thinking about, just making it break it down, but like the conscious brain is you and I talking, and then my subconscious brain are like the thoughts in my head. And really listening to tapping into those thoughts. And it's not going to be something you can do right away. It's just listening and doing things that bring you joy, because then you can start getting into that subconscious and be like, ooh, that looks fun. Let me try that. Or like if you feel you're just not energized every day and you're completely exhausted, you and I have talked about this, and just what are you doing every day that's draining you? Obviously, there's going to be responsibilities that you have to do based on if the kids need to get up and dressed, or you have to go to work or things like that. But like, what are some things that you can navigate and have a little bit more leeway on? So instead of scrolling Instagram for an hour before bed, maybe you read a book, or maybe you draw, or whatever that is, so you can tap into that subconscious mind. Because like you and I have talked about, is like that Instagram world, which is not bad, right? Because this is going to be on Instagram, but
we're both on it.
Yeah, but why are we finding that we constantly need to distract ourselves?
Yeah. So it's like when you get on and you read something really interesting, it's not that moment. But how many times are you scrolling, right? And why? And really intelligent people create those apps to be very mentally addicting. And so it's this dopamine hit that isn't allowing you doing anything, right? And the scroll is like, oh, look, I'm zoning out. Like I'm kind of in like a weird trance, like a TV level. Like I'm not thinking, I'm not doing anything. But then you come off of it and you feel awful. And it's not even because of what you saw. It's because of whatever you went in to avoid. You didn't avoid. You just checked out of it and tried to dissociate from it. And then it didn't go away. So it's like checking into your body. I feel uncomfortable right now. Take a few deep breaths, close your eyes, step outside. Like, why? What am I uncomfortable about? And if you sit and you witness it, it will move. That's what I see more often than not. If we're just willing to look, witness, see,
and feel,
these emotions are not trying to harm us. They're literally trying to show us where our belief in our mind is that is causing us pain. So emotional pain is the first, physical pain is like the long term. Oh, now my back hurts. And we talked about that in the beginning. Like, how does that relate? It's okay. If you are constantly clenching your muscles from stress and you move in a weird way, any fitness trainer will tell you got to be in the right position to do certain things, you can cause an injury. But in the long run, you're always holding that muscle tension the same way based on your physical alertness of fight or flight. You're not going to heal it. The cellular repair, the body doesn't heal in stress.
No, it does not. No, it lowers your immune system. You're not able to recover.
Yeah.
And that's when we have this host of chronic illnesses. And again, that's not saying like anybody's to blame for their chronic illness. It's just like what are some things that we can do to heal inside too? I like to merge both Western and Eastern medicine because I think together they can be very beautiful. But I think that they're so far apart from each other and they like fight with each other all the time. And I'm like, how about, I like being a physical therapist because you're like in between the two naturally, but I feel like I lean a little bit more in my life towards Eastern, but I still use Western medicine to help me, right?
Because
save my life.
They think more holistically, whereas Western, there are emergency moments where the advancement, it's not going to be time for stillness and meditation. Like eventually maybe, but you're like, oh, this is an emergency. And I feel like the Western world, and this is a perfect metaphor for how we function, is really good at band-aiding emergencies in the short term. Yeah. We're great at it, actually. Like, it's incredible what an emergency surgery can do, what even some of our cancer responses can do now that they couldn't, and even some of our medications can do. But in the long run, they serve chronic the least. We have the most chronic illnesses of almost any developed country. Like, we're really high. I don't know the actual statistic, but I know we're really high. And we have the most money in our medical system. And I'm not going to come at, oh my God, the conspiracy, the medical's bad. I don't think that's helpful because there's been times where they've been the most amazing thing. And you're so grateful, and go to a country where you don't have that. And you're like, wow, this is stressful.
I mean, yeah, Western medicine saved my life, and it's also saved my life with chemo and stuff like that. But it's just interesting because I know somebody recently I've been diving into like my blood sugar spiking and crashing, even though my A1C is technically considered normal. So that's your blood sugar baseline from the past 3 months. It looks normal, but what I'm finding is I'm getting these spikes and then crashes, and then I experience anxiety and stress. And I know somebody that is pre-diabetic, was very close to diabetes, and they reached out and asked their doctor for a glucose monitor. And they said, you don't have diabetes, you don't need it. And it's like, whoa, insurance won't cover it. It was that, and then insurance won't cover it. I was like, you've taken away that person's right to monitor and prevent future issues by saying no.
Which is crazy because diabetes is so high.
It is so high, so but that's like, what people are hearing.
Yeah.
It's, you're not diabetic, you don't need that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because you just took that power away from that person, and you told them that you assumed that they didn't want to pay for it because they said, oh, insurance won't pay for it, which is actually not true. I don't know where that came from, but this is a bigger hospital system, that person that said this. And it's, man, if we are coming at health so wrong.
Yeah.
And having these conversations, and it's almost been like, you can't prove intuition. I can prove results.
Absolutely. Go do it for yourself and see, right? That person had an intuition that would work for them, and then they were denied that because the system doesn't operate on, I had a feeling. But that is an opportunity to look for outside of that. Yeah. Right? To step outside of that system and be like, actually, I can, or actually, I'm going to push. I'm going to be my advocate. And our world requires you being an advocate for yourself, right? It really does. You got to have a voice.
Yeah.
And to use that intuition to be like, who makes me feel seen and heard? So if anyone could take away anything, pick your providers and your wellness helpers and whatever you're doing based on who makes you feel good in your body when you're in their presence.
Just like gaslighting is really big. Oh, you feel that way. That's not right. I'm sure we've all experienced that in healthcare. We're like, no, you don't need that. And I'm like, I didn't ask you what I needed. I was actually telling you how I was feeling, and you came back and denied my feelings. Yeah. And that sucks. And then I feel crazy, and then I have to call somebody and be like, hey, this just happened. Am I wrong? Did I do something wrong? And no, you asked for, in this case, that person's like blood sugar monitor. You were told, no, you don't need it because you don't have diabetes. It's like, but you were just on me about protecting myself from diabetes, but yet you are not willing to give me the key thing that helps me prevent getting it. And just like questioning, if you leave a provider's office and you feel guilty, shameful, frustrated, unheard, switch.
Yeah, you're not going to get healthier there. No. Because again, they are not even, much less they're not thinking about checking your blood sugar, right? Which feels like obvious, right? They're not even looking at the full holistic physical side. The emotional, mental, spiritual side doesn't even exist. Right? There are areas where it does, right? And there's people coming up in that, and there's amazing providers in that. So it's like,
totally, there's
try to find them. It is not the easiest. And if you can't, and you're stuck with something, right? Use your intuition and just be stubborn. I'm not going to do that. Sorry, but no.
Yeah, that's not serving me. But also, if you find a good practitioner, I can guarantee you good practitioners know other good practitioners.
They do.
So when you find one,
Yeah.
you can, I'm very particular about where I send people because I'm like, hey, listen, like I've been in this cycle of trying these different people and learning different things and trying to find this. But it's the biggest thing is coming at your health from that emotional, spiritual, and physical aspect. And spiritual, I guess, I don't know if necessarily subconscious is like would you say that's spiritual?
I would say for a lot of people, that is where, if they're
emotional.
not actively spiritual, it's both emotional meets spiritual, right?
Yeah.
So it's, the emotional is how it feels when it's happening, right?
Yes.
The spiritual is, do we trust that there is something going to take care of us in life, that we can let go and lean back into our intuition, that we have a right to that, right?
Yeah.
That's the very basic level of spirituality. Obviously, it's all the way down to religion, deep spiritual practice, which I'm all about, because you can see a lot of people have a lot of deep healing from just that.
Yeah.
But on the more basic level, right, coming back to that, we're talking to a kid, it's the way that we think life works for us comes to the spiritual. And if there's something that can help us and guide us, and that we can trust in something, that we can have trust, right? And that's going to affect our emotions for sure. And our emotions are the indicator of where we're at with that. If anything, they're like a temperature check of, you're feeling great. Spiritually, you're probably feeling really connected, or things are working out, even if you don't consciously know that. And if you're feeling absolutely terrified, I don't think life's going to work out. There's a spiritual belief in there that there's not something available to you to have service, or a place where you can put your fears and worries outside of yourself. And I would say that's the spiritual, whatever that needs to look like for someone. It's having something outside of your like current version of just you, how you know yourself, your personality, your body, to feel like you have to connect to. And that really can be different. Some people, it's their higher self, or some people, it doesn't exist to them, but they believe in nature and they see nature and they just trust that cycle, whatever it is. And it's like you brought up, like cancer brings you to this place of, disease brings you to this place of, well, death, right? And so it's looking past just our body, our life, to say what is not necessarily what's next, right? But okay, I can't just rely on that to feel safe. My body can break down and I need something else. And so that's another deep dive that someone might do. And that's really where the spiritual exists.
It's really interesting because this could be a whole nother podcast, but
10-hour
with death,
podcast.
but I think death it can generally be scary, but if you live every day in gratitude and enjoy, like, I can guarantee you I wouldn't have had those thoughts prior to cancer treatment. I would have been like, okay, like I've really lived my life.
Yeah.
And then when you do that, it's a little less scary because you're like, okay, I'm living how I want to live right now. And so just in general, but it's just, I could go on and on about this stuff.
We could go down so many places. It's so fun.
But really, like in summary of what we're talking about is check in with yourself. Your conscious brain are the things that you're doing right now. And then your subconscious brain is more your inner thoughts. So what is that dialogue? Because I know that I've definitely carried a lot of shame and guilt, and that has limited me. And then really, what are those things? I have the fear based around money, fear based around doing things that bring me joy. Because, oh my God, what if I do that and it doesn't work out? And then XYZ, that's okay. That's a fear that's controlling what I'm doing. So diving in more to some of those thoughts. And the best way to really do that is to put your mind, your conscious mind at ease. And whether that's a hobby, piano, whether it's just meditating, whether it's spending extra time in the shower or the bathroom, whatever it is, just your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship in your life.
And it will be reflected everywhere you go.
If
you're always looking through that lens, right?
If you're always a victim and you think it's everybody else. I remember a patient told me this. It was really funny. She was like, if you run into 3 assholes in one day, you're the asshole.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I remember that all the time when I'm like cranky. I'm like, oh, I'm the asshole.
I know.
Today.
I'm like, I'm the asshole today. And that's okay. Right? But, just love yourself through that.
Yes.
But recognize this narrative, whatever you're telling yourself, if you check in with it, one, that's how you're going to see the world. That's how you're going to experience the world. That's how you filter.
Yes.
And so become conscious of that. And 2, pick a new story. Put it in there, program it in, whatever you got to do. There's so many ways to do that. I can help you with that. You can probably even see that in patients and guide them towards that in the physical work that you're doing too. Yeah. Pick a new story, release the clenching you have on this fear, survival, victim narrative, not to deny any time you might have been a victim, but to come out of the past, that moment, and to become present with your empowerment. And the empowerment is, I decide what narrative I live in, and that defines my life.
Yeah, and if you want to come at that from the really the scientific point of view, we've got these pathways in our brain, and we can reestablish new pathways, and that's called neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
You can look that up, and it's like, I hate the saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because I find that inhibits people too.
They used to think you couldn't create new neural pathways past 35. Yeah. Turns out sometimes they're wrong, and in a few years, they might find out that you can create new neural pathways. Is it as easy as when you're 12? No.
No, it's harder.
Because as we're learning piano, we know. You're like, using my left hand at the same time as my right, but doing different things. That is very challenging. Yeah. Neural pathway, though, I can.
You can. It's just a matter of refocusing, and just start a little bit every day. Just even bringing that to your conscious brain can be huge. Yeah, it's so great having you. And then I'll tag you in the show notes so people can find you and reach out.
Absolutely.
And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.